This is NTD Newsroom, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
Thank you for staying with us. President Trump is canceling all executive orders signed by former President Joe Biden using the Autopen. Trump made the announcement on Truth Social. President Trump said approximately 92% of documents signed by the former president made use of the Autopen. Trump wrote, quote, "Any document signed with the Autopen is hereby terminated and of no further force or effect. The Autopen is not allowed to be used if approval is not specifically given by the President of the United States." Trump said Biden was not involved in the Autopen process, and if he says he was, he will be brought up on charges of perjury. Joining us now to discuss this is Gerard Filitti, Senior Counsel with the Lawfare Project. Gerard, thank you for joining us today. So, number one question here is President Trump's announcement on Truth Social enough to immediately invalidate these documents?
It is if it's accompanied by his executive order directing that these Biden-era executive orders be canceled, be revoked. He certainly has the authority to do that, but he does need to actually reduce this to writing, not signed with an Autopen, through an executive order. That's perfectly valid.
So just to be clear, the president has unilateral authority to just declare documents signed through Autopen invalid.
It's not the Autopen. President Trump has the authority to revoke every single executive order that President Biden implemented. So he could, for example, issue an executive order of his own, revoking all of the, I believe it's 162 executive orders signed by President Biden with or without an Autopen. That is his legal prerogative. It doesn't matter whether or not they were signed with the Autopen. The new administration, the new president, has every legal authority to invalidate previous executive orders.
You know, some might worry legal challenges might follow, but since you're saying he has the authority, does that mean any legal challenges would be useless?
It depends on how detailed President Trump is his invalidation. He cannot legally, for example, retroactively invalidate them. So, for example, he can only invalidate these orders going forward. He can't go back in time and say that effective the moment President Biden signed something, it was not valid. That he does not have the legal authority to do. That would be legally challenged, and the challenge would probably be successful. So there are ways that if Donald Trump is too broad in his invalidation, it might result in a legal challenge. But going forward from today, from whatever date is Donald Trump signs this order as president, he can invalidate past orders going forward.
So this is a small thing, but I'm wondering if you can speak to where that 92% came from. There was a congressional inquiry into the Autopen. I mean, could today's move be the result of that, where that 92% estimate came from?
It's very likely that that is a result of a congressional inquiry, that Congress did hear details about President Biden's use of the Autopen. And we also have documentation, there's contemporary evidence with President Biden actually being photographed, for example, signing some executive orders. So we know that he did sign a number himself. But what Congress did uncover was evidence that the vast majority, some 92% apparently, of those executive orders were signed by an Autopen. Now, it's not illegal to use an Autopen when you're president to sign orders. The question is whether President Biden understood what he was authorizing when he and actually authorized the Autopen to be used instead of manually signing each document. That's a question about his capacity and his understanding, not the legality of an Autopen. So ultimately what President Trump is saying is that 92% of the executive orders signed by President Biden, are unclear as to whether President Biden understood he was signing them.
Okay, speaking of which, could former President Biden be charged for perjury if he says he signed these documents in question?
Likely not, for a few reasons, one of which is I don't think that he's ever said he physically signed them himself. The issue is if perjury comes to people saying that they discussed what President Biden was signing with him and he agreed that his signature can be used by Autopen. Those people might be charged with perjury if it turns out that President Biden did not understand what he was authorizing. So to put it simply, Even if you're not signing a paper physically as president, you have to understand and give permission for your signature to be used by the Autopen. If someone is lying and says that President Biden gave his permission but never did, they could be charged with perjury.
All right, Gerard, final question. More broadly speaking, does a document signed through Autopen carry the same weight when a president himself physically signs a document?
It absolutely does. It has the same legal effect whether he signs a bill passed by Congress or an executive order. The only question is to whether the president understands and gives his permission for the use of Autopen. It can't be used without his consent. So that really is the issue that President Trump is getting at, that the congressional investigation was looking into, whether President Biden understood and was giving permission for the use of his pen.
Well, all right, Gerard, well said and very clear. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
President Trump is now escalating his immigration crackdown amid the aftermath of the D.C. shooting that took the life of a 20-year-old National Guard. The suspect, a 29-year-old Afghan national, is now facing a murder charge as the Trump administration looks into deporting his family. NTD's Washington correspondent Mari Otsu was on the scene when the shooting happened, just blocks from the White House, and we now go live to her on the White House's North Lawn. So, Mari, good afternoon. What do you have?
Don, good afternoon. Yes, a very tragic Thanksgiving for the families of both 24-year-old Andrew Wolf and 20-year-old Sarah Beckstrom, the two National Guardsmen who were shot just outside the Farragut West station on the day before Thanksgiving. Coming to work just now, I saw there's an impromptu memorial set up there with flowers, American flags, and notes of thanks and prayer to the National Guard. And specifically Sarah, who tragically passed last night with President Trump announcing that from Mar-a-Lago, Florida, where he is for Thanksgiving. Both Wolf and Beckstrom were among the 300 West Virginia National Guard mobilized to D.C. during President Trump's crime crackdown on August 11th. And according to Attorney General Pam Bondi, both had volunteered to work the holidays so that others could be home with their families. And tragically, U.S. Attorney for D.C. Jeanine Pirro also added that both Andrew and Sarah were sworn in less than 24 hours before they were shot. Here's President Trump last night talking to service members, but also addressing and announcing Sarah's death. Watch.
I want to express the anguish and the horror of our entire nation at the terrorist attack yesterday in our nation's capital, in which a savage monster gunned down two service members in the West Virginia National Guard who were deployed as part of the D.C. task force, which has done such an incredible job. I must unfortunately tell you that just seconds before I went on, right now, I heard that Sarah Beckstrom of West Virginia, one of the guardsmen that we're talking about, highly respected, young, magnificent person, started service in June of 2023, outstanding in every way. She's just passed away. She's no longer with us. She's looking down at us right now.
President Trump also added last night that he would be calling both Andrew and Sarah's families on Thanksgiving, but that he wanted to wait a moment to give them their privacy and time. And meanwhile, Attorney General Pam Bondi, reacting to Beckstrom's death on X, says that she's devastated that America will never forget Sarah's courage and asking for prayers for both of the Guardsmen's families. Well, she also doubles down and says that there will be justice, thanking President Trump for bringing back the death penalty for murder cases in the nation's capital. And West Virginia Governor Patrick Morrisey also eulogizes Sarah Beckstrom, saying she, quote, carried out her mission with the strength and character that define the very best of the West Virginia National Guard. This comes as Pirro says that the suspect, a 29-year-old Afghan national, will now be facing a first-degree murder charge. Watch.
Our hearts go out and our thoughts and prayers go out to the family of a beautiful 20-year-old Sarah Beckstrom who answered the call to serve her nation. And she volunteered, and she ended up being shot ambush style on the cold streets of Washington, D.C. By an individual who will now be charged with murder in the first degree. There are certainly many more charges to come, but we are upgrading the initial charges of assault to murder in the first degree.
Meanwhile, President Trump is vowing to, quote, permanently pause migration from what he calls all third world countries, saying in a post on Truth Social that, quote, only reverse migration can fully cure the immigration situation in America. The president says that 53 million foreign-born people live in the U.S. largely on welfare, saying that costs American citizens, and promises policy to deport Biden-era entrants and federal benefits to non-citizens, and to denaturalize anyone who's deemed a security risk or, quote, non-compatible with Western civilization. This comes as President Trump says that the suspect in the shooting, 29-year-old Afghan national Lakanwal, was one of those, quote, flown in by the Biden administration in 2021. What President Trump is referring to here is a Biden-era program called Operation Allies Welcome, which provided entry to Afghan nationals during the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021. Take a look.
This is what it looked like when they came in. It was total bedlam. Do you remember that period of time? Total bedlam. People crammed onto the plane. And the toughest, meanest, most capable physically got on the plane. Not the people that we were looking for or that they wanted to bring in. Here's a picture for you. This heinous atrocity reminds us that we have no greater national security priority than ensuring that we have full control over the people that enter and remain in our country. For the most part, we don't want them.
The Biden administration says that Operation Allies Welcome was intended to protect and support what it calls vulnerable Afghan families, including those who worked alongside the U.S. in Afghanistan. Meanwhile, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem criticizes the program broadly, saying, quote, that it allowed in thousands of unvetted Afghan nationals, including terrorists. And now, in the wake of the shooting, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services has announced that it's stopping processing immigration applications from Afghanistan. And meanwhile, the same agency is also saying that it's going to re-examine the green card holders of countries of those citizens coming from countries of particular concern. Don, back to you.
Okay, Mari, thank you. What will be the next steps to prevent this type of shooting from happening again? Lawmakers are pushing changes to immigration laws. NTD's Melina Weisskopf has more.
Following the deadly D.C. shooting, reactions are pouring in from Capitol Hill. Some Republicans are pushing legislation to change immigration laws. Senator Rick Scott reintroduced a bill to better vet immigrants, specifically ones who came during Biden's Afghanistan withdrawal in 2021 to 2022. Others are calling for mass deportations. Senator Tuberville wrote, "We must immediately ban all Islam immigrants and deport every single Islamist who is living among us just waiting to attack." Congressman Randy Fine is drawing attention to the scale of the issue.
People want to focus on what happened in Washington, but I'm thinking about 6 months ago, an Egyptian Muslim refugee throwing flames on Jews in Colorado. This is an endemic problem that is the result of...
He's urging the administration to deny entry, deport all non-citizens, denaturalize all fraudsters, saying we start with Afghanistan, but we must not end there.
We will do everything in our power to seek the death penalty against that monster who should not have been in our country.
After the tragedy, immigration is likely to be a key focus on Capitol Hill as lawmakers return to D.C. after the holidays. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
President Trump posting on Truth Social, he will permanently pause migration from all third world countries. Joining us to discuss is Andrew Arthur, fellow in law and policy at the Center for Immigration Studies and former immigration judge. So good afternoon, Andrew. Hopefully you had a good Thanksgiving holiday. So about what Trump said, what would the process look like legally? How would he enact such a pause in migration?
So what the administration would do, what the federal government would do is it would shut down visa counseling in certain countries. Individuals from those countries, when they apply for visas to come to the United States, they would find that their applications had been paused and that they wouldn't be allowed to obtain those visas in advance. And for those individuals who already have visas, when they show up at a port of entry, CBP would then turn them around. That's a slightly more legally difficult process. But thanks to something called the principle of consular non-reviewability, the president does have the ability to stop the immigration to the United States of any individual or individuals that he deems appropriate for any period of time that he deems appropriate. So he actually does have the power with respect to those individuals to come to the United States.
You know, Andrew, I can't help but think whether it's tariffs or anything else President Trump tries to do, there's always something that happens, like a bump in the road or something. Would there be some possible obstacles that he could potentially face, whether legally or otherwise?
So, yeah, I anticipate that if the president were to act on this plan, that advocates would go to court, would attempt to get a temporary restraining order or preliminary injunction of that policy. Now, we saw something very similar under the first Trump administration when the president placed bars on the admission of immigrants from certain countries to the United States. That was the travel ban, or what the president's critics called a Muslim ban. That went all the way to the Supreme Court. Lower courts had actually blocked the president's proposal. But when it got to the Supreme Court found that the article of law that he used as the basis for that program oozed deference to the executive at every turn. And that was an actual direct quote from the decision. So the president actually has the authority. The question becomes whether, as a political matter, it's going to be popular, or whether it's one of those things that needs to be done on a large scale. I could definitely imagine that we need to do a better job of vetting people before they come to the United States, vetting people before they're granted asylum, and vetting people before they get green cards. But yeah, I think that what you're actually going to see is a much more tailored process than what the president is describing.
So, Andrew, let me ask you something specific about the Post. It said that the government would denaturalize migrants who undermine domestic tranquility or are non-compatible with Western civilization. I'm wondering, is this legally a valid reason for stripping citizenship?
I think that what the president was referring to there, as the congressman had alluded to earlier, was individuals who had engaged in fraud in order to gain naturalization can be denaturalized. If you gain any immigration benefit through fraud, that benefit can be taken away from you, and that includes naturalization. But simply denaturalizing individuals because they have beliefs that are at odds with other beliefs that other Americans have. That's a much more questionable legal issue. I think most people that have citizenship who have been sworn in, who didn't engage in fraud, are going to be able to keep, will be able to keep that status. I think the courts would definitely knock down any attempt to take their citizenship from them. But I think that what you're going to see is a much more broader review of past naturalization grants to see if there were indicia of fraud, to do investigations, and then to denaturalize people. But yeah, there is a legal process for denaturalization, but it is extremely limited.
Okay. And the Trump administration is apparently looking at deporting the shooting suspect's family. So, on what grounds could this be done legally if the family weren't involved in the crime?
So, under the Immigration and Nationality Act, if an individual carries out a terrorist attack, engages in terrorist activity, then not only that individual, but that individual's spouse and children are also removable from the United States. This is a very rarely used provision in the law, but it's one that's been in the law for 2 decades plus now. So the president does actually have the authority to do that. The Department of Justice, DHS, do have that authority. And in fact, if those individuals are taken into custody, they can't be released from custody, even if they didn't know anything about the terrorist attack. And this is, not to punish them, but more to give individuals who would think about engaging in terrorist activity pause before they do that. And I think that that's a pretty laudable goal.
Okay, Andrew, I just have one more thing. I'm wondering about this migration pause. So on an international level, some nations say the U.S. has an obligation to accept refugees and asylum seekers. So, I mean, does the U.S. have any obligation in this regard?
No, actually not. With respect to refugees, there is a provision in the law to bring refugees to the United States, but the executive branch has full discretion on which refugees should be allowed to come and in what numbers they're allowed to come. So, that itself is not actually going to be an issue if this is the way that the president decides to go. With respect to asylum, if an individual doesn't have any right to enter the United States initially, the United States isn't under any obligation to allow them to enter this country. Now, people could come illegally and apply for asylum that would be covered by this, but the federal government does have the authority to detain those individuals until they're actually granted asylum. And I think that this particular class of individuals would be subject to additional scrutiny, more vetting, things like that. So, I think that this is one of those things where, certainly on the margins, it's definitely legal. But I think that, the president is simply, expressing outrage at how many individuals unvetted were allowed to come to the United States under the last administration.
Well, all right, Andrew, I think that about covers it. Thank you for explaining this so clearly for us. President Trump has pledged to permanently pause migration to the U.S. from all third world countries. It comes after authorities identified an Afghanistan national as the suspect in the shooting of 2 U.S. service members, killing one of them and seriously injuring the other. Joining us now to discuss is George Carrillo, former Democratic candidate for governor of Oregon, and we have Matt Klink, Republican strategist and political analyst. So first of all, thank you both for joining us today. Hope you guys had a great Thanksgiving. And George, I'd like to start with you today. What are your thoughts on the president's position?
So first, I'll say that this is a very tragic situation with our National Guard. Being a former Marine myself, loss is always difficult. What I'll say is that, the president is right in looking at what were the vetting processes of especially this situation with this Afghan immigrant. I think having just a blanket reaction is not necessarily what's needed, but I do think that we need some further understanding of what that vetting process was like and who we currently have in the country and who we that don't belong here that are going to create harm, not just to National Guard, but to members of the community.
Let me go to you. How do you view President Trump saying that he's going to pause permanently all migration from third world countries?
I think that it's a rational and reasonable response. I mean, look, the Biden administration let 87,000 people from Afghanistan into this country with their chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, where they killed, where 13 service members were killed at Abbey Gate. They left about $800 million worth of U.S. military equipment on the ground, and they just picked up and dropped off 87,000 people with no way of knowing if these people were good people or bad people or otherwise. And I think that it makes a lot of sense. I mean, look, if you look at what the Biden administration did, is they let people in from countries where we have no ability to verify who people are. We have a lot of military-aged Chinese men crossing the California border. In all likelihood, now they are lost somewhere in the interior of this country. You have gang members coming in from Colombia, like Tren de Aragua. You have people from Haiti, from Somalia, and other countries. I mean, look, if you want to come to America and you want to assimilate and be part of American society, we welcome you with open arms. But there has to be a process to determine the good people from the bad people, and we only want the good people. And Joe Biden letting in 10 plus million without any criteria whatsoever did incalculable harm to America. In fact, we saw the result of it happen on Thanksgiving with the 2 National Guard troops that were shot.
George, do you agree with Matt that immigrants should try to adopt and adhere to the values of the United States?
So I believe if you want to come to this country and you want to not just work here, but also become an American citizen, that you should. I mean, we're Americans. We're all proud to be American, and there is a certain culture here that you have to love this country and sacrifice much for. And many immigrants have sacrificed so many, just like dreamers who have served in our military. Myself, I was born here, but also a disabled Marine Corps veteran. So there is a certain amount, but let's also talk about the people that we're talking about, like some of the Afghan refugees. Some of them fought aside next to us. They fought with us to fight terrorism. They were translators. They were hardworking individuals, and also putting their life on the line, not just for themselves, but for their family members in their villages. And one of those American promises that we made to them was that they would, when this conflict is over, that they would be able to come back. And now that the Afghan government is still a threat to the United States and to those people that served with us, our promise to them was that they would be able to come over here to the United States. Now, that whole situation in the Biden administration, I remember watching the video and us leave and seeing, people flocking to the airports, trying to get out of the country. They were starting to become accustomed to democracy. They didn't want the U.S. to leave, but it was time for us to leave. And that was, one of the downfalls of the Biden administration. We needed to have a better process. But according to the FBI and also to, the Trump administration, when previously, that this was done correctly, the vetting process was done. There's always going to be bad apples. We're not going to be able to get everybody out that we don't want in this country or that are going to do some sort of harm. That's just for anybody. In our society, it's not a perfect society. People do commit crime, even for American citizens. So right now, what we have to go through is we have to look to see what did we learn from this situation and who do we know that we don't want in this country and get them out.
So Matt, could you speak to this point? My previous guest was talking about this as well, that not all Afghan nationals fall under this category of this suspected shooter. But the U.S. now is pausing all immigration applications from Afghan nationals. So just talk to us about this point.
Well, I think you're talking about apples and oranges. I think that this gentleman that is alleged to have killed the two National Guard troops, he came over during the Biden administration post the chaotic withdrawal, and there was no vetting process. I respect George for his military service, but I disagree with him. There was no vetting process. They literally let people into this country that they didn't even know who they were. And that's a big problem. So I don't think there are a lot of Afghanistanis trying to immigrate to the United States right now. But look, the 9/11 Commission's recommendations said that we should limit immigration from countries that support jihad. The Biden administration canceled that from 2021 to 2025 when they held office. So we haven't even done what was a recommendation following the worst terrorist attack on U.S. soil. So pausing immigration from countries that seek to do us harm, no, it doesn't give me any great concern. In fact, it makes me feel good that the Trump administration is stepping up and looking out for the interests of American citizens first, not just opening our doors willy-nilly to immigrants who come to the U.S. and want to harm Americans.
Okay, George, if you agree that the U.S. should improve its vetting of immigrants, how does the country improve in this aspect?
So I think it's looking at the situation, even though that it is tragic, that we can't classify all individuals that come from these countries as bad people. Like I said previously, there are many good people that want to live American values, that have helped us, that have fought next to us, and we need to take that into consideration. I think reviewing our vetting process is reasonable. What I don't think is reasonable is that we permanently close our doors to immigration. We are a country built off of immigrants, and we should always continue to respect that. Again, we're never going to be this perfect society. We're not, by closing the doors doesn't mean all of a sudden that now crime is going to cease, or that our law enforcement personnel are not going to get killed. This is a situation where two people were harmed and killed. And yes, it is tragic. It is part of the job. But if it wasn't an Afghani, it could have been an American citizen. We just can't look at this one situation and close the door to towards all immigration. It doesn't matter whether it's under a Biden administration or a Donald Trump administration. We've got to learn from this, and we've got to improve our processes and understand that pointing the finger and blaming each other will not bring those service members back.
Matt, your view on whether closing the doors to third world countries will make the U.S. a safer place?
Look at the pattern that exists here, though. The Biden administration lets gang members from Colombia, from Trinidad into this country. They start distributing drugs and engaging in child prostitution, taking over apartment blocks. The Trump administration tries to deport these people, and the Democrats stand up not for American citizens, but for Trinidad until the Supreme Court stepped in and said, yeah, Trump can't get rid of them. And a lot of them are now sitting in jail in El Salvador. When are the Democrats going to start worrying more about American citizens and the goodwill of American citizens than allowing people? I mean, George says we need that we have a process that could improve. No. The Biden administration had no process. They just let people in willy-nilly and hope that everything would come out okay. Hope is not a strategy here. So if the pause happens and we can go and we can intelligence share with countries, we can use biometric exit strategy to ensure that we know who people are leaving, that we can verify people based on passports, that they say they are who they say that they are, and that they really want to come to this country and be a part of American society. I welcome them with open arms. But if you're going to come here and you're going to do harm, or if you're going to scam the taxpayers like what's happening in Minnesota right now with the Somali immigrants, we don't need you here. You can go back to your country.
George, your response.
Well, I think when it comes to immigration and immigration policy, this is not a Biden error. This is something that the American the country has struggled with for generations. This is a can that's been kicked down the road between Republicans and Democrats. No one has had the will to be able to correct our immigration system here. And what we're faced with now is we're faced with crackdowns. We're faced with being brown in America, that it's gives reasonable suspicion for someone like me to be able to be detained, violating my constitutional rights. This is not about being Democrat or Republican. This is about being an American and understanding that people do have rights in this country, and that viewing immigrants as just these illegal, bad people that were gang members and were drug dealers is wrong. We're actually educated people that have made this country stronger and better. And creating this divide between Republicans and Democrats and immigrants versus non-immigrants doesn't necessarily make a country stronger. It only makes us weaker. It makes our economy weaker. And it opens us up to any sort of foreign attack because of the fact that we are so divided as a country.
Okay, let's wrap up this conversation. I started with George, so Matt, final thoughts.
No, look, I think that the pause is a smart thing to do. We do need a process. I have no problem with legal immigration. The problem is that we have had open borders for 4 years under Joe Biden. We likely have up to 30 million people who broke the law to come into this country, and they're here illegally, period. That's the simple fact. And if you're here illegally, you need to go home, period. Other than that, look, what's happened to the men and women, the man and the woman who were shot by the Afghan refugee, it's tragic. I think that we do need this pause to make sure that the process is in place so that people who want to do harm to this country, and if they're in this country, they need to go home very, very quickly. It didn't happen under Joe Biden. I have a lot more confidence that it will under Donald Trump. And George, happy Thanksgiving. And again, thank you for your service. Semper Fi.
Well, all right. Well said, both of you. Thank you very much for joining us today. George, Matt, thank you. President Trump announced that Sarah Beckstrom, a National Guard member who was shot in Washington, D.C., has died. Joining us to discuss is Jimmy Graham, former CIA protective officer, retired U.S. Navy SEAL, and founder and CEO of Able Shepherd. Jimmy, good afternoon to you. Thank you for joining us today. It's a sad situation because these two National Guard members had only just been sworn in, and one of them selflessly volunteered to work on Thanksgiving just so that, we can be safe with our families and friends. So in light of this, maybe you could just speak to the spirit of these Americans who choose to serve.
Yeah, we can't miss that, and thank you for asking that. Because being a vet that has volunteered to serve through the holidays, especially one with a daughter named Sarah, it just hits close to home that there are still people, there's young people out there that are still patriots that are still going to step forward, and we can't make light of the fact that in a terrorist attack, one of them was just senselessly murdered.
How should we, in moments like this, how should we reflect and honor the selflessness and sacrifice of our service members, law enforcement as well? These people who keep us safe, especially during this holiday season.
Yeah, I believe we honor them by doing our part. When people step forward to do their part, a part that we won't do, quite frankly. When I went overseas, I did that on behalf of a nation, and my ask was take care of my family, take care of my country. So these people are doing their job, they're risking their lives. When people enlist, they sign a blank check. They say, whatever the cost, I'm in. I'm in for to do my part of this. We're not doing our part back home, right? So these senseless laws, this, allies welcome, like all of these failed. 4 years ago, I was on the Mike Huckabee show talking about the repercussions of that exit from Afghanistan. It was absolutely atrocious, but there's honor in serving, right? So we're doing our part. Do your part, meaning citizens. How do you raise people like this, like that, like Sarah? It starts at home. It's churches. It's schools. It is this group effort to build that person, help grow that person that will step forward and say, "Send me."
So, Jimmy, I understand you are a veteran yourself, as I mentioned earlier in the beginning. And if I could just tap into your experience there, what does it mean for you to serve?
To serve, I tell people there's active duty, quote unquote, active duty for the military. And that was going for me to foreign lands and not knowing exactly what I was going to do, entrusting in the intelligence community that would tell us there was a good faith thing saying that we believe in what we're doing. Tell us strategically what you need and I'll do it. And I might die doing it, right? But then I would encourage people too, right after Thanksgiving, you have a role too. So veterans, I took an oath for life, and maybe perhaps you did too. I am more active now than I've ever been. So I would invite veterans back into active duty. And I would also say, even if you haven't served in the military, serve this nation. Return to, I say, back to good. Let's get back to decency. Let's get back to a plan. There was nothing wrong with the plan called America. We just stopped doing it. The answer for our future lies in our past.
Seeing all the sacrifices these people make for us, I can't help wonder what makes it worth it for them. What keeps these people who serve the country? What keeps them in uniform? And what keeps them going?
I believe that doing my faith, like at the foundation of everything is my faith. But even if you don't have the same faith as me, growing up, everybody had this ethical right and wrong. We understood what was right and wrong. I think getting away from that, do people know what's right and wrong? Some people want to be part of the solution, not the problem. My 7-year-old daughter on the way to school, I said, what are you gonna do today? And usually they'll say something like, get A's or make Jesus famous, something like that. And she says, I want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. She's 7. She didn't accidentally say that. She was invested in by her parents, by her school, by her church, by her grandparents, by everybody that loves her enough to tell her the truth. So the answer to all of this is the truth. And when you don't aspire to leave a legacy, you do what's right because it's the right thing to do, and that leaves a legacy and grows healthy children. That's what needs to happen. And then some of them get called to service. And they say, you know what? I will go pay a price, possibly with my life, for this entire nation that loved me enough to tell me the truth. That's something worth defending, and send me.
Jimmy, it's hard to imagine these families going through this. We were with our families on Thanksgiving, but Sarah's family, they were in the hospital with her along her side. And now she has passed away. Families carry an emotional burden as well tremendously, knowing their loved ones could be in danger. How do they reconcile with this, or find the strength to offer support despite the danger?
You know, it's my thoughts and prayers are with Sarah's family. It's just horrible, and anybody that's a part of the other guardsmen that were shot as well. That's everybody hopes they don't get that call, right? They hopes that they hope that they don't get that news of their loved one that they knew was serving. They knew they were out risking it, but the truth is, none of us know. So there is, I would say, don't look away from it. Honor those who have fallen. Have the courage to look at. I even talk about the Charlie Kirk video. Watch the video. Why? Because you'll find another gear. If you don't have the courage to look at the truth and what's really going on, then who will face these atrocities? So in death, we appreciate life. And for me, I've got many, many SEAL team buddies that didn't make it home. That is now fuel for me to work harder. So I did live. Their kids and their grandkids are still alive. Who's going to make a better future for them? Well, me, because I made it home. So now that's my job to continue service.
Okay, Jimmy, I would just like to ask you one more question, if I may. We talked about faith earlier. You were talking about knowing right from wrong. Can you just speak a bit more on this? What role does faith play in times like this?
That is the role. Like, it is the foundation. Like, if you believe that people were made in the image of God, you probably shouldn't shoot holes in them, right? So there's this divine gift that was the United States of America. Like, that people had the courage and the drive and the foundation on which to build. That's why it's one of the greatest nations this country's ever seen, maybe ever will see. Right? There has to be. I'm not a construction worker, but I know this: you need to have a foundation before you build. So that foundation for everything else is my Christian faith. And I know a lot of people have a problem with that. I say, you believe whatever you want, but if more people were like that, then this would be a stronger country, right? You don't see a lot of people out there losing their mind when they have a solid foundation, good head on their shoulders, and they want a good work ethic, and they want to um, be a part of something bigger, be a part of something better. It's not specific just to Christianity, but what do you believe in? I think if people understand who they are and whose they are, they would start treating people better. There would be a sustainable future for this country. Again, this isn't some new thing for the future. It's an old thing in our past. And if we still love this country, we should consider it again.
Well, okay, Jimmy, well said. Really appreciate you having this conversation with us. Thank you.